Part 4 of this video series. I am very glad that I'm already so far with this. Yeah, this is easily the longest video out of all of them, also the most messy video probably. This is basically all over the place, all the different genres that I just couldn't fit together. Basically, this video is just gonna be everything. So yeah, I'm going to start with true events and biopics, then I'm going to move on to crime movies, romances, dramas, and in the end, also German movies. I'm probably one of the only persons who doesn't really like Goodfellas as much as basically everyone else does. I think it's a good and fun movie, even though there are so many great things about it. It's very inconsistent in my opinion. I don't know, I just can't really get into it even after a second watch. Two other Scorsese movies that basically do the same thing as Goodfellas are in my opinion much more consistent. The first one is The Irishman. The Irishman feels like what would happen to Goodfellas if the story was just continued until the end of this guy's life. The Wolf of Wall Street is a very similar rise and downfall story like Goodfellas or The Irishman, but it's a very different movie because it has a much more chaotic nature. It's always fun to watch. There's a lot of good humor in it, but it's also very disturbing and really shows you this mind of the person you are following, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, which easily is his best performance ever in a movie, in my opinion. Even though I can't blame it, because it's still a true story, War Dogs is a movie that really feels like it's trying to do the same thing as The Wolf of Wall Street again, just not as good. I don't think it does anything new or exciting, and it's a very forgettable story for that reason. And Pain and Gain is very similar to that, but it's directed by Michael Bay, so it has the Michael Bay humor with the style of a movie like The Wolf of Wall Street, and I did really enjoy it. Catch Me If You Can is another movie where Steven Spielberg tries out a new genre and makes a perfect movie basically in that genre. I'm not the biggest fan of it because I'm not as interested into the story, but it's still a very fun, well-paced, well-acted movie that is just enjoyable to watch from front to back. The first movie written and directed by Aaron Sorkin is Molly's Game, and his very energetic dialogue is very present in this movie, but this movie has two parts that are not very consistent in the movie, even though they fit as a story very well. The Infiltrator, with Bryan Cranston playing an undercover cop, is an enjoyable crime movie, but it feels very long. BlacKkKlansman as well. Spike Lee made a great movie with a lot of humor, even though it's about a subject that is really not that fun and a story that could be very exciting and very dark, but it's played in a very lighthearted way, and it was the first movie that showed me how great of a comedic actor Adam Driver is, in my opinion. Official Secrets, a political thriller that really just shows you how bad humanity is oftentimes. The movie is not made in a very outstanding way, but the story is just so gripping that you are always interested in following the story along. The same thing goes, in my opinion, with Argo. I think Ben Affleck did a good job acting and directing his film, and it had a lot of very tense sequences that I really enjoyed watching. Moving on to some movies about people in the entertainment business. The first is Mank, David Fincher's movie about Herman J. Mankiewicz, I guess is his name. I couldn't get into this movie very well. I thought it looked very good and I thought it probably had good dialogue, but it's just 2 hours of people talking about things I don't know anything about and I can't relate to. The Disaster Artist, a movie about the making of The Room. I really want to watch The Room after this one because this was such a fun experience. Even though there's nothing really wrong with Judy, I think Judy feels like a very normal type of biopic about a person that has a lot of struggles in the entertainment business. I'm still struggling with Blonde. I think it's a very well made movie. Technically, this movie looks amazing. This has so many great things about it. The acting is also so good, but it just feels like this movie gets very repetitive. I'm not the type of person who thinks, okay, we shouldn't make movies about Marilyn Monroe ever again. I don't have a stand on that opinion. I just think make some movies, and if it's good, I'll probably watch it. But this movie was just 3 hours of just a person dealing with every single piece of tragedy that can happen to a person, and at some point it just gets very draining, but not in a good way. Like it's very repetitive in its tragedy. Like there's always something, and at some point you just feel like you're not invested anymore. Dolomite Is My Name is one of the most happy and hopeful movies ever. It's about a guy who just did things and it worked in some way and he had a lot of fun doing it. I don't know. This is just a comfort movie in a way because you just can't get not motivated watching this film. Even though I didn't think about Tick Tick Boom a lot, I think this is a very well made movie. I thought it had a lot of great songs, and I think the editing in this film is especially very, very good. Being the Ricardos is another Aaron Sorkin movie, but not as great. This is just very boring. It was kind of interesting seeing everything behind the scenes of how they made TV shows back in the days. But other than that, I wasn't invested in any of the characters in this film. Bombshell is a pretty good movie. I think the story is more important than the movie itself. The movie is portrayed in a very glamorous way, but I feel like the best things about this movie was when it gets very personal, especially with Margot Robbie's character. And other than that, I just didn't get invested in this movie because of its very different style that I don't really enjoy. Like Julie, The Eyes of Tammy Faye is another biopic about a person that I don't really see anything wrong with, but is it that memorable? Not really. I, Tonya, I really enjoyed for being very different. It's very disturbing in a way and not glamorous at all. Like, this is just a very true and honest portrayal of a character, which I really enjoyed, and I think Margot Robbie's performance is amazing in this film. Another movie written by Aaron Sorkin is Moneyball. I think this movie should be very boring because it doesn't really show anything that exciting, but it is always engaging and you never feel bored with this movie. I was always engaged in what was the next step in this film, which is kind of interesting because there's nothing really that I'm interested in. I'm not interested in baseball, I'm not interested in numbers, but I still had a lot of fun with it. Now to some more historical biopics. First of all, Braveheart. I thought this movie was a lot of fun. I think if I rewatched this, I would appreciate it a lot more for its spectacle. But when I initially watched it, I wasn't really into that as a lot. With Lincoln, Steven Spielberg does another genre, and this time it's a biopic about a historical person, and I think this is easily one of my least favorite Steven Spielberg movies. Even though the performance by Daniel Day-Lewis is pretty great, and I really enjoyed just watching Lincoln talk. There was nothing really interesting about the story, and there was nothing for me to connect to. There was like one or two scenes that I was invested in, really, where I thought the drama of the characters was actually something interesting. First Man, a Damien Chazelle movie that is very different from his other movies. Even Babylon is a lot more like Whiplash and La La Land probably, and First Man is just a random movie in a way. He out of nowhere just does a biopic about Neil Armstrong, which I think is pretty interesting, especially because it's really good. I love this movie. This has a very sad and melancholic tone. I didn't expect that from this movie, but I really need to rewatch this because even though, again, there's nothing really that amazing or outstanding about it, I was always invested in every single scene I watched. 12 Years a Slave is very weird to me. I do appreciate this film. It's very disturbing and has a lot of great acting, but I kind of felt disconnected a little. This is one of those movies that I'm not really sure about why I didn't like it as much as most people do, because it's a very well appreciated movie. I really liked Lawrence of Arabia. I thought the way they portrayed this character, Lawrence, was very interesting and different from what I usually am seeing in a biopic. But what I mostly loved about this film is the big spectacle and the huge scale of this film. There was one scene where they raided a city, and it was some of the best cinema I think I've ever seen. The Last Emperor is another movie like 12 Years a Slave that feels very disconnected and weird, and mostly because of its editing maybe and its performances in the first half, but the movie slowly gets into being more serious, at least in my opinion, and I just got a lot more invested with it. I think this is a good movie. Spencer is a movie I really loved when I watched it. I think this is an amazing looking movie. It's one of the best looking movies I think I've ever seen. But for some reason, I just never really thought about it again. Like, I watched it and didn't have a complaint at all. I nearly gave this 5 stars, but I never really thought about anything that happened in this movie again. It just didn't really leave me with anything, despite being a very good movie in itself. The Two Popes was weirdly fun. Just seeing two popes talk to each other and eating pizza and drinking Fanta. I don't know why this worked so much, but it did. The Danish Girl feels like another biopic. I don't have a huge complaint about it, but it's definitely my favorite Tom Hooper movie. Not because it's all that great, but we'll get into it. Gandhi. Gandhi is amazing. I think this is one of the best biopics ever. I think it starts out by saying, hey, we can't put the whole life of such an important person into one movie, but what we can do is we can honor him. And I think this is amazing because it does that. And I think the huge scale of this movie really works for it, because every single scene where there's so many people involved with just one shot, they are so stunning to look at, and I really loved every second of it. Even though it's a 3-hour long movie from the 80s about a guy who I don't really have any idea about. The Revenant is great. It's directed by Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu. And I think it's easily his simplest movie. Like, it's just about a guy taking revenge for something that the guy did to him. If this movie didn't look as great and wasn't as long, I think you would get... I think I would be a lot less invested in it because it didn't feel like such a huge journey that this guy has been through. The Theory of Everything, another biopic about a person. Not really anything to say, but I really like Eddie Redmayne's performance. The Social Network, I don't really know what to say about this one because I also didn't get anything from it in a way. Like Spencer, I watched it and I had a lot of fun, I guess, with it. It was very exciting to watch. It moved very fast. The dialogue was again great, written by Aaron Sorkin, but afterwards I never really thought about it. I don't really know what to think about it. A Beautiful Mind, directed by Ron Howard, won the Best Picture award, which is very weird because these types of movies usually don't win the Best Picture award. But I really enjoyed this. I thought it was great because it was different from other biopics, simply because of the fact that it tried to get you into the mind of this person a lot more than other movies do. Moving on to some other movies about people who are not really famous, but they are based on true events. First of all, Beautiful Boy, a movie about Timothy Chalamet playing a drug addict and Steve Carell playing his father, and it's about their relationship and how he struggles with getting sober. It's amazing. It's very well acted and feels very realistic, and it's very hard to watch. Hillbilly Elegy is a movie that was getting a lot of criticism, mostly because it depicts this world that the main character lives in as very stereotypical. At least that's what I got from most of the reviews that I've seen. But it's a movie from a guy who basically told the story about his life. So that's just the environment that he lived in. I can't really blame him for living in that environment, even if it seems very stereotypical. The Pursuit of Happiness, a Will Smith movie that is not a comedy. I just enjoyed every step of the way in this film, and it was a very heartwarming, emotional movie. I enjoyed every single second of Green Book. I obviously heard a lot of the criticism about it. In a way, I get it, but to be honest, I just love seeing these two guys develop their relationship, and it's just one of the most fun and entertaining movies to me. With great music, great flow, very lighthearted, very happy. I just really enjoyed it. Then I have two movies about Tom Hanks playing a guy who survived a very dangerous situation. First of all, Sully, directed by Clint Eastwood. This is one of his worst movies. I haven't seen a lot of Clint Eastwood movies, but this is just not good. The scenes portraying the event itself are very exciting to watch, but other than that, the movie just doesn't really have anything interesting. It doesn't even hold up for 90 minutes. I think this would have been a good short film at most. And the other movie is Captain Phillips. It's a Paul Greengrass directed movie, and you can really feel that. Tom Hanks plays a captain of a ship, and he gets held hostage. And this is one of the most stressful movies. And after the 2 hours and 20 minutes of this film, just watching this guy go through so much shit, the release at the end is so relieving and nice to watch. I really think this is a very well-made movie about a real event. Fruitvale Station, a movie directed by Ryan Coogler. This is a great movie about one event that happened on one day. I think it's very tragic that it happened. You just feel sad after this film. After this movie ends, you just want to punch something because you feel the injustice that happened with the real story that this movie is based on. A movie that I really, really enjoyed, but I just haven't really thought about again, was The Impossible. It's about a family that has to survive during a tsunami when they are on vacation, and it's great. It's 2 hours of this family trying everything that is humanly possible to try to get together again. Every scene is just so exciting, and you feel every bit of emotion that this family feels because it's a very tragic story. 127 hours. It's a movie directed by Danny Boyle, and I think this is very interesting because it doesn't feel like the style that Danny Boyle usually does movies, but I really enjoyed this film. Like with a lot of one-location thrillers, this has to do a lot with a very limited location, and I think they did it really well. The Trial of the Chicago 7 is, I think, the last movie with Aaron Sorkin being involved with it. He wrote and directed it again, and it's great. And I wish the ending wasn't as cheesy. I think the ending isn't even real, like they just made up something that is, it's not even a good ending or a better ending than the story that was actually taking place. So I just wish they changed that, but for the most part this movie is incredible. And Argentina 1985 is another courtroom drama film about something that is very important to the Argentinian history. Again, this movie is more interesting because of the story itself and not because it's so well made. Now I want to move into some war movies. First of all the ones that are still based on true stories. First of all, 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi. This is a movie by Michael Bay, and easily the most mature movie that he has ever done. Michael Bay's very over-the-top action style that it looks very stylized and is very grand, very loud. Actually fits because it really puts you into the experience of these soldiers that were there. and I think this is really good. It's easily one of Michael Bay's best movies. Lone Survivor is a war movie. It doesn't feel like anything exciting, even though it's a good story. There's nothing really outstanding about it. I'm not sure if 1917 is based on a true story, actually, but I think this movie was, for the most part, very good. The first half didn't really catch me a lot because the concept of the film being filmed in one shot felt like a gimmick in the beginning. I just couldn't get into the story a lot. But slowly but surely the movie got more and more investing the closer they got to their goal. There was one scene that's about 5 minutes long. That's one of the most exciting movies in cinema that I have ever seen. I couldn't really get into Dunkirk. It's a Christopher Nolan movie, and I just need some characters to latch onto, and this movie didn't have any characters really. It's more about the event, and I just, even though it's technically very well made, I wasn't that interested in it. Schindler's List, a movie directed by Steven Spielberg. It's such a perfect movie that I can really not say anything specific about it, but this movie as a whole piece is just amazing. Steven Spielberg's other war movie, Saving Private Ryan, is also great. I don't really have much to say about it, but it does a really good job at making you feel with the characters in these very stressful and very dangerous battles that they found themselves in. 7 Years in Tibet felt like a lot of different movies that didn't really fit together very well. It had some weird editing. It felt tonally kind of all over the place and just didn't fit very well, even though all the different parts about the movie in itself are very great. The Pianist, another movie that you just can't not like. It's a movie about the experience of war just getting worse and worse and worse, and it's very good. The Imitation Game, also great. I think the best part about this movie is easily not just the acting of Benedict Cumberbatch, but also just seeing this group of people trying to crack this code, and they want to help, but they just cannot not help. They are trying to crack this code while more and more people of their country are dying in the war, and that's a very, very great conflict to see, which I have not seen in a war movie this far. Another Tom Hooper movie is The King's Speech. Again, I mean, The Danish Girl is easily his best movie this far. The King's Speech feels like pure Oscar bait. There's a lot of good things still about it, like it's not completely unenjoyable, but it really feels like just trying to get Oscars. And yeah, this is what I don't like about movies like these. Hacksaw Ridge, a great movie that has a very long first half that doesn't even take place in the war. Which I didn't expect, but yeah, I think the last half or the last 40 minutes of this film are just pure battle, and it's incredible to watch, just incredible. And now two movies I left out before because I wanted to talk about them in this context, which are the two Ghibli movies that are about the Second World War. First of all, The Wind Rises is basically a biopic in a way. It's a fictional biopic about a person who designed planes that were used in the Second World War, and I think that's an interesting concept. And what I like about this movie is that it's basically an obsessed artist story and not a story about a guy who wants to go to war or anything. It's just a guy who's so desperate to fulfill his dream at making planes that he kind of forgets about the fact that he's making them for war. And I think that's an interesting way to look at this situation. The other Ghibli movie, Grave of the Fireflies, directed by Isao Takahata, is amazing for the most part. There's one decision in this movie that kind of ruins this whole situation for me because it's about two kids trying to survive during war. But there was one decision that they made that made the whole rest of the movie kind of worthless because it's a very obvious decision that would bring a very easy solution to the film, which it just didn't make, and I can't forget about that. All of these next movies are about fictional stories in war. The next one is also an animated movie. It's In This Corner of the World, an anime about just a family living during the Second World War. I think this has a great way of showing that life just goes on. There are a lot of scenes where the city where they live gets bombed, and it's very tragic. It is very destructive, but after that they just kind of have to keep on going, and I really loved how they just depicted all these people continuing on with life and trying to cope with the situation in a very human way. A movie directed by Terrence Malick is The Thin Red Line. I thought this was good. There was a lot of poetry, at least it felt like that. It was just people talking about their experience with war, but I didn't really get what they were exactly talking about. I thought the movie was very difficult to understand, even though it's just about some people going to war. The Boy in the Striped Pants feels like a movie that has children as the audience because it is a very tame version of what it is like in concentration camps. But it also has a lot of moments that are really not for kids, so I don't really know what the target audience of this movie is. Even though there's a lot of great things about it, I still don't think this movie is very consistent. Jojo Rabbit, I couldn't really get into this movie a lot. Taika Waititi did a great thing, in my opinion, with not making a lot of research for Adolf Hitler, so he really has this child perspective of Hitler. But this movie I felt very disconnected with. I didn't really get interested in any of the characters, and this movie just felt like a concept that sounds very nice but isn't really executed very well. Come and see one of the most disturbing war movies ever. It's about a boy who really wants to go to war against Germany, and slowly but surely his experience in war just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and even worse, and it's one of the best movies doing this type of story. Inglourious Basterds, a Quentin Tarantino movie. I thought this was fun. I think it's very interesting to look at this movie in a bigger perspective, because there's a lot of characters that are set up for a very long time but that are not really used for the story as much. But I think that's a great way of laying out the story in a way that everybody can die, even though they are very important to the story in the beginning. They are just dead very quickly, because that's just war. People are dying. And Inglourious Basterds has easily some of the most tense sequences I think I've ever seen in a movie. Fury, even though this has a very Hollywood ending to me, I think this has some of the best performances I think I've seen in a war movie. Especially there's one scene in the middle that is very slow but has some great character drama where you don't really know what's going on in the minds of these characters, and they just feel like the most traumatized people ever. And you can feel that trauma in their performances very well. The Grand Budapest Hotel has a fun story. Beginning and end really is not my thing. I just didn't connect with it. I didn't care about it. But the main story of this film is very fun to watch. The Hurt Locker, a great movie directed by Catherine Bigelow, the one who also made Point Break, which I think is interesting because this woman can make a very stressful movie. It really shows that in The Hurt Locker as well. Black Hawk Down is Ridley Scott's take on a war movie. I thought this movie was not bad, but it felt like I have seen all of this before and done better. It was just kind of a movie that did a lot of things that are not really that special anymore in a war movie. Jarhead is a great movie. It's directed by Sam Mendes, and what I really like about this is how it shows these characters who are so stressed out because they are constantly in this environment of war, but they are never fully able to get into battle. And at some point, it's just the tension rises more and more and more, and they just want to go to battle at some point. They just want to kill, which is a very interesting look into the mind of a soldier during war. And I really like that about it. I kind of have to mention this movie here because I guess African Kung Fu Nazis. I thought this movie was going to be a very fun, low-budget movie, but just like Sharknado, it's just draining and boring. And I think I watched the first half of this movie with a friend, and he just didn't want to watch it anymore. So I said to another friend, a few weeks later, I think, hey, let's watch the second half of this movie. And I think after 10 minutes, she didn't want to watch it anymore. So it's just not fun. I think I had to drink a lot more alcohol with it. And Apocalypse Now is this type of downfall story during war, but done incredibly well. I watched the Redux version of it. Don't know what else you could improve about this film. It's very disturbing and just constantly more and more draining to watch, but in a very good way. Now we can get into some crime movies. Let's start with the ultimate crime movie, The Godfather. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola, just like Apocalypse Now, I think The Godfather is a perfect movie, just like Apocalypse Now. It took a rewatch to really get into what this movie actually is. Like, I saw The Godfather not really knowing anything about it, and I thought this movie was going to be a very huge story about all of these different people that are very important, and I just have to remember this name, and this guy did this, and this guy did this, and it was just very hard to follow. But I realized on a rewatch that this movie is about Michael Corleone and nobody else. He is the center of the story. It's about him. It's about his character's downfall, and I think it's great to watch. The Godfather Part 2 is very difficult to watch, like even more difficult than the first Godfather, because there's a lot more characters and a lot more going on. But what I like most about it is how they show the continuous downfall of Michael Corleone, paralleled with the continuous rise up of Vito Corleone, which I think is very great, even though the story of Vito Corleone itself is really nothing outstanding. Even though a lot of people don't like The Godfather Part 3, I think this is still a great movie. The worst thing about this movie easily is Sofia Coppola's performance, it's really not that distracting anymore at some point. Very similar grand crime story of the life of one person is Once Upon a Time in America, a movie directed by Sergio Leone, and it is amazing. A 4-hour exploration of a person who has nothing left in life anymore, really, after he kind of betrays his friends. And it's one of those movies that, even though maybe not every single moment is completely investing, you always feel like every moment is important because it's such a grand story that I don't know how they could have told this story in a shorter way than 4 hours. And that's amazing to think of. Scarface is goofy. I couldn't really take this movie very seriously. I thought it was way too long and not as great as most people think, even though it was a lot of fun and had some great scenes. I really liked the finale of the film. But to be honest, I think Scarface and Al Pacino's portrayal of Scarface is goofy. A Sam Mendes film that not a lot of people know about actually is Road to Perdition, and this is a very well made film. What I love most about it is how Tom Hanks has all these scenes connecting with his son while also trying to outsmart the people that are following him. And yeah, this movie has a very slow progression of its plot that I just thought was very well done. Like most of Martin Scorsese's movies, The Departed also needed a rewatch, and I loved it on a rewatch. This was so much fun, so exciting. It never lets you down because it's always something new, always something is happening. It's so filled with tension, and I love all the different characters and how they all affect each other's actions in this film. The Gentleman was this kind of very complicated story of The Departed, or I don't know, The Irishman, Goodfellas, but not well made. I think it was too complicated and not very easy to follow. I just got very unengaged with the story at some point. Michael Mann's Heat is good, but I don't really know why this movie is 3 hours long. I thought it was a good story, but honestly, it wasn't all that special to me. I thought Michael Mann's other movie, Collateral, was much more engaging. Just the chemistry between the two characters played by Jamie Foxx and Tom Cruise was very great to watch, and I really like how Jamie Foxx's character develops over the course of the movie. The Usual Suspects, I don't know why this movie is so highly rated, but I thought it was a fine movie, but I never could engage with this movie. And I think the last scene of this movie is great, but other than that, it was just fine to watch. Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs is great. Worst thing about this film is how the pacing is just very off, especially when the scenes come in where they just talk about the robbery before it actually happens. But other than that, I think the story of this movie is so amazing and very unpredictable. And his other movie, Pulp Fiction, I actually watched once and didn't think it was all that exciting. I just couldn't really get into it because I didn't really know what Tarantino was all about. Then I watched it a second time and I really loved it and I had so much fun with it. And then I showed it to my girlfriend and I realized how boring this movie actually is. I'm really conflicted about this one. There's a lot of great things about it, but it's also not that exciting. And Jackie Brown, a movie that needs a rewatch. I enjoyed this movie, especially how all of the different characters try to outsmart every single other character. And I think this very long sequence where event is shown from a lot of different perspectives, and I really like that. But yeah, again, I think this movie needs a rewatch. A movie not directed by Quentin Tarantino, but written and also starring Quentin Tarantino is From Dusk Till Dawn. This is great. I didn't know what to expect exactly, but I kind of knew what the second half of this movie is gonna be. But if you watch this movie just completely without context, I think you are mind blown of how goofy this movie gets. Some movies by David Fincher, I really can't get into David Fincher movies that much. I think Gone Girl is pretty fine, not that exciting to me, and I thought Ben Affleck's performance in this film is very boring. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was not the most engaging movie, especially after some time, like it really drags on. Seven was a very fine crime movie until like the last 20 minutes. The last 20 minutes really make this movie as great as it is considered, but before that it's just good. And I thought Zodiac was also a very good movie, but nothing I would ever want to rewatch because it's just not that special to me. A very similar movie to Zodiac is Memories of Murder. It's a movie directed by Bong Joon-ho, and it's about cops trying to find a serial killer but not really being able to. The best thing about it is how the two main characters, which are two policemen, I like how their characters progress over the course of the movie. Therefore, I think it's one of the most well-written movies. This is basically perfect. Before Christopher Nolan was able to make all of these mind-blowing blockbuster action movies, he made a mind-blowing drama about a guy with memory loss trying to find the murderer of his wife, and I think it's incredible how this movie is told in such a coherent way, even though it has this very weird structure that Christopher Nolan has constructed for this film. LA Confidential, a movie directed by Curtis Hanson, and this is one of the most perfectly written movies I've ever seen. I love this movie so much, and again, just like Memories of Murder, all of the main characters have a progression in the movie that you can see, and therefore you always can predict what is happening next because all of these characters are constantly changing. Prisoners, a movie directed by Denis Villeneuve, and this is a good crime drama, especially because of its great performances by Hugh Jackman and Jake Gyllenhaal. Other than that, this wasn't as memorable to me, but I still really liked it. Searching applies this concept of everything taking place on a PC screen onto the genre of a murder mystery, not murder mystery, but a mystery about the disappearing of a daughter of the main character, which is a plot that is in itself already interesting, but because it uses this concept so well, I think this is an amazing film. It's really a perfectly constructed mystery that always is investing, always is surprising, and really never boring. Martin Scorsese's Shutter Island feels the least like a Martin Scorsese movie, to me at least, but I thought this was a very well constructed story again, and easily one of Leonardo DiCaprio's best performances. And now for some straight up murder mysteries. First of all, Murder on the Orient Express, I thought this was fine. Not the most outstanding movie. I didn't really care for the characters a lot, and to be honest, I mean, there's obviously a reveal in the end. To be honest, that reveal just kind of made me enjoy the movie a lot less. It kind of takes away from the fun a little bit. To me, Clue, I really enjoyed. Making a movie out of a board game is just such a fun idea, to be honest. I don't know why there's not more of these, but this is just a perfect execution of that. I just enjoyed this movie a lot, and even better in my opinion is Knives Out. Knives Out is written and directed by Rian Johnson, and this is easily the best thing he has done this far. It's, again, such a perfectly constructed movie. Everything about this film is so well thought out. Every single plot point, every single detail gets used in some way or form. This movie doesn't have a single unnecessary scene. Every character has a very important place in this story. Everything is utilized very well. I thought this was so amazing, and together with the music and the performance by Daniel Craig, this is just such a fun movie as well. Now some crime movies about con artists. First of all, American Hustle was boring, like really boring. I think it's directed by David O. Russell, and it is just not fun. It was very overcomplicated, and I really could not care less about anything that was happening. Logan Lucky is a movie directed by Steven Soderbergh. It's a heist movie that I just enjoyed a lot. Like, there was not a lot to the ending. I think this movie was kind of anticlimactic, but I always had fun watching it. There was nothing really bad about it. Then to the Oceans movies directed by Steven Soderbergh. All of these movies kind of flow very nicely and have an interesting plot, but the first movie really does it the best, and the other three movies are just not as investing. Another heist movie, which is a spin-off of Army of the Dead, the zombie movie directed by Zack Snyder, and it's kind of fun. It's definitely better than Army of the Dead because it's much more consistent and knows much more what it is. It's not trying to be anything more than a heist movie. Another movie is Christopher Nolan's The Prestige. I also didn't really care about this one. There was a very nice plot twist reveal in this one that I thought was pretty good, but I just didn't really care for most of the things that were happening in this film. Now You See Me, I wish this movie was a little bit more realistic. Were a lot of things that just wouldn't really happen, which I thought were kind of distracting from the main plot. But other than that, this movie was enjoyable, and I thought Now You See Me 2 was actually even more enjoyable because it kind of knew more what it is. Focus was a very fun movie about con artists, but also a romance between Will Smith and Margot Robbie, and I thought this was very fun and very investing. Nightmare Alley, directed by Guillermo del Toro, was very all over the place, but not in a bad way, to be honest. There was a lot of different things in this film. It's not like the movie I just mentioned, 7 Years in Tibet, where there's a lot of plots about this movie that don't really fit into one. Nightmare Alley really fits a lot better because the main character has all these stages in his life that lead to the ending. And I thought this was, by the way, such a great ending and one of the best acting performances by Bradley Cooper I've ever seen. And now, I guess, all the other crime movies I have on this list. Trainspotting, this is very difficult. It's directed by Danny Boyle, and I think I enjoy it. I couldn't really get invested a lot in the story, but thinking about this movie, it really feels like on a rewatch I would just enjoy this a lot more. There's also T2 Trainspotting, which is also directed by Danny Boyle, which was a lot more focused on a plot. It was a lot slower and was much more focused on the characters than the experience of how drugs affect their life, which is not a bad thing. I definitely enjoyed this movie a lot more. The two movies directed by the Safdie brothers. First of all, Good Time. I thought this was a very simple movie. There was not much to it, even though I really enjoyed it. It was very stressful, a very interesting performance by Robert Pattinson. Yeah, this movie had a very anticlimactic ending in a way, but I did like it. But to be honest, this was just a good movie, and basically everything that was good about this one was even better in Uncut Gems. This is a movie about a gambling addicted man, played by Adam Sandler, which is easily his most unusual performance, probably. To be honest, this movie is so great. One of the most stressful experiences I think I've ever had, but in a very good way. I really enjoyed everything about this. I think I watched it 2 or 3 times already. On the first watch, I liked it. I couldn't really get into it, but on a rewatch, I kind of understood more what it is, which I really enjoyed. And the more I watched it and the more I thought about it, I think this is just a perfect portrayal of a gambling addicted man, and I think it's very impressive, and I'm very hyped for the next thing that the Safdie brothers do. 3 movies directed by Park Chan-wook is the Vengeance trilogy. First of all, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, which is amazing. This was a very slow progression of its plot with a lot of characters that have something to do with each other, and everything that a person does with the reason of vengeance or revenge is completely destroying them at some point in this film. It was fascinating to see. I really like this movie a lot, but I think everything that this movie does well, Oldboy probably does better. This is such a great film. A plot twist that I did not see. Characters that are so incredibly tragic. It's really just sad to see their progression over the course of this movie. Such a very difficult to understand story, but after a rewatch or maybe 2 rewatches, it just gets clear how well thought out this story was. This really made me fall in love with Park Chan-wook's movies. This guy is very talented. His 3rd movie in the Vengeance trilogy is Sympathy for Lady Vengeance, not Mr. Vengeance, Lady Vengeance. And I thought this was easily his weakest out of the 3. This was just very inconsistent because it also has this very fast pace that Oldboy had, but only for the first half, and the second half has a much more slower pace, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't fit as well. And after that very slow progression of events that was in the last act, there was nothing much to it, which I thought just kind of lacked. I think the other 2 movies were a much better depiction of revenge and vengeance, I guess. And this one just kind of didn't do a lot for me. A Martin Scorsese movie, Taxi Driver, a classic. I couldn't really get into this movie as much, but I really liked the tone of this film. But other than that, I think I just need to rewatch this. Then I have a lot of movies that I just randomly got on DVD from a family member. First of all, The Jackal. This was a boring movie. I did not care about anything. It was so slow, so incredibly lacking of anything. Kiss of Death was a fine movie that I would just see on TV and probably instantly forget about, but I have it on DVD. That's the reason why I remembered this film. Rising Sun is a pretty fine crime investigation movie with Sean Connery, which I enjoyed. Entrapment was kind of a romance, actually. I basically enjoyed everything about watching this film, but it wasn't as memorable. I don't know. And then there's The Negotiator, which is great. This is about a hostage negotiator played by Samuel L. Jackson, who takes a hostage because he was framed for something, and he has to go against a hostage negotiator who obviously tries to free the hostages from this hostage negotiator. It's a very interesting concept that I really enjoyed. I thought this was a great movie because of the 2 main characters. Both of them have the same experience basically, and they just have to go and try to outsmart the other guy, even though that guy basically has the exact same experience and the same job, and they are both very good at their jobs. And yeah, this is a very interesting and very unpredictable plot. The Cop was a movie I watched on TV and I really forgot about it, so I don't have a clue. City of God, one of the best rated movies on basically every website about movies. I couldn't get into this movie as much as I think everybody else does. I thought it was a well-made movie. I really liked how they depicted this city and how every character kind of has an influence on each other in a very massive way. But other than that, this movie just didn't really influence me a lot. Destroyer is a movie directed by Karen Kusama, who also directed Jennifer's Body and The Invitation, and I thought this was also very good. This movie has a lot of emotional weight, and I thought Nicole Kidman was very great in this film. Schimmelleg is a Netflix movie with a similar structure as Memento, where the whole story unfolds backwards. I thought this was good, but it definitely doesn't reach the highlights that Memento has, in my opinion. Burn After Reading is one of the few Coen Brothers movies that I've seen, and easily my favorite. This was just a lot of fun, and even though I don't want to repeat myself, because I already said this about City of God, but this movie especially has all these different stories connected with each other in such a difficult way to explain. Like, I couldn't explain the story of this movie because it's so complicated but so fun. A lot of these performances are so funny. There was a lot of lazy things about it, to be honest, I really didn't like the ending of this film, but it was definitely very enjoyable. Thoroughbreds was fine. I don't really have anything to say about it. The White Tiger was just goofy. Like, there was a lot of good things about the story itself, but the way this future self of the main character talks about the story just doesn't really make sense for the story, and it's very goofy. Siberia was a movie with Keanu Reeves, and it was very bad, especially the ending. Like, it's just an ending that doesn't really have anything interesting about it. They just kind of didn't know where to go anymore, and so they just ended it. At least it felt like that. It was not good. Antoine Fuqua's most well appreciated movie is Training Day, and I kind of also couldn't get into this one because it as well felt very goofy in some points. I thought the story was a very interesting concept, but not everything about this movie was very investing. And the last crime movie on this list is End of Watch. This was great, especially because of the main performances. The story was always interesting to follow. The movie goes in a lot of scenes that don't really do anything for the greater story, but because it feels so realistic, especially the two main characters, played by Jake Gyllenhaal and Michael Pena, there is a lot of emotional weight that goes into this movie, especially in the ending. Okay, now we're done with all the different crime movies I have on this list, and we can finally move into one of the final genres that I have for this list. And that is romance movies. I of course have to talk about all of them, the bad ones and the good ones. Starting with the bad ones, 50 Shades of fucking Grey. This movie was really bad. Not just that this movie is only about sex scenes that are not even very sexy to begin with, but the dialogue and the acting was so atrocious in this film. I just could not believe what I saw with this one. 50 Shades Darker was definitely the best one out of the whole series. Not good, but still a little bit better. They kind of explored the backstory of the main character a little, which was kind of interesting. This was just very passable. 50 Shades Freed is completely horrible. There is really, and I really mean that, there's nothing good about this movie. The thing is, the romance of these movies is already solved in a way, because, spoilers, they get together in part 2, and so what are they gonna do at this point? Oh yeah, let's just fight off some bad guy who's jealous about, I don't know, man. Fuck this movie. Moving on, 365 Days. I want to say it's better, but it's objectively not really better, but it's definitely a lot more fun. Because one thing, and that is sex. This movie at least has good sex scenes that feel like sex scenes. That is everything good about this film. Again, the dialogue is very bad, the acting is not very good, and the fact that this is not a horror movie but a romance is actually very scary. But this is at least kind of fun to watch because, again, this movie is at least a bit sexy. The second movie, 365 Days, This Day, kind of, it seemed like it realized what's only good about the first one, which is the sex scenes, and they really doubled down on it because the first half of this movie is just sex scenes and nothing else. But after that, they introduced a plot in this movie, and it was so hilariously bad and so boring that I really just thought, wow, I don't want to do this anymore. But they made a third part, and that part is called The Next 365 Days. It's just the same again. Moving on. Some rom-coms I've seen. First one, She's Gotta Have It. I think this is my first black and white movie that I've ever seen. And I thought I was so smart watching this movie. I wanted to interpret all of these different things in this film. But it really is just a movie about one girl having 3 boyfriends. And I thought it was fun. Crazy Rich Asians is a rom-com. I did not really care about this one, but it was kind of fun to watch. The Wrong Missy, a movie about David Spade accidentally dating the wrong Missy. And the wrong Missy is incredibly annoying. She has kind of a redemption arc that makes her a lot less annoying, but this is still very annoying. The Love Bots is about a couple that kind of gets into a very interesting crime mystery plot. It's very weird, but it's a fun movie that relies a lot on improvisation, but not in a bad way because they are actually funny and have a lot of chemistry. A Nice Girl Like You has very bad editing and pacing, but I thought it was still a pretty charming movie, even though it was not good, really. Trainwreck is an Amy Schumer film that is not good. It's very uncreative, very boring, very bland, not memorable. The Lost City could have done so much more with this plot, but to be honest, it took the most uninteresting and surface level approach to the story, and therefore I just really did not care about it. 50 First Dates is the rom-com for me. I think this movie is so much fun. It's a movie about Adam Sandler falling in love with a girl who has memory loss, so the girl forgets She fell in love with Adam Sandler every single day, and he kind of has to convince her that he is the right one for her. And this is so much fun. Some movies about dysfunctional relationships. First of all, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. There's so much creativity going into this film, so many impressive filmmaking techniques. But in the center of this movie, it's obviously the romance in a way. Jim Carrey playing a character who doesn't want to forget this romance, even though he's chosen to delete all of his memories, and is such a tragic and heartbreaking movie in a way, but also so much humor in it and so much creativity. I just really thought this movie was impressive. 500 Days of Summer was fine. There was a lot more humor to this movie than you would expect with such a concept, which I appreciated. Brokeback Mountain is incredible, especially because of the great acting performances by Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger. There's so much great drama in this film about two gay cowboys, basically, struggling to live a normal life in a time and a place where homosexuals are not really that accepted. Blues the Warmest Color, a French movie that is about 3 hours long, about a romance between two women, which I just thought was beautiful. There was a lot of great things about this, and French movies have a different feeling, and this is definitely a case for that. In the Mood for Love, I did not care about this one a lot. I think this guy's movies are interesting, definitely, but I just couldn't get into the story a lot. And with Chungking Express, I think that's in a way the same. I appreciate this movie a lot more, definitely. And I was invested a lot more. But this movie is about two different love stories. But the problem is I didn't notice that in the middle of the movie, the main character switches. So I was basically, for the whole movie, following one character when it was in actuality two different characters, which my girlfriend told me in the end, and I was just mind blown. And I really have to watch this movie again because I did not realize that we were following two different characters. Some romance classics are, first of all, Titanic. I am amazed how this 3 hour long romance about a sinking ship is so investing in every single second, and I was really invested also in the romance of Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. Another movie about Leonardo DiCaprio falling in love with someone is Romeo plus Juliet. I could not take this movie seriously. I mean, obviously the story of Romeo and Juliet is pretty good, but this whole old stylized aesthetic that Baz Luhrmann has put onto this movie is just so much. And I really could not get into this movie. A Jane Austen movie is Persuasion. I cannot get into Jane Austen movies, especially not this one, because this one is actually bad. Like, it's really annoying. It's not just uninteresting, it's really annoying, especially how self-aware the main character is trying to be. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button was a very long film. I was surprisingly invested in this story. Like, if you take away the fact that obviously this is a very unusual concept, then this is actually a pretty great story about the life of one person and the romance that he has with a woman. And it always kind of goes back and forth between them meeting and falling in love again and then separating again. But it is very, very realistic despite the very unrealistic concept. With Before Sunrise, I couldn't really get into this movie. It just kind of felt like this romance is developing very quickly. Like, it didn't feel very earned how they instantly fell in love with each other. I don't know. This movie just felt very quick in a way. But that being said, Before Sunset was perfect. Like, this one didn't get ruined by the problems that I had with the first one, and therefore I just went with it, and I thought this movie was so investing and so beautiful to watch. One of the most beautiful romances definitely I have seen. And Before Midnight was still good. It's much more depressing, but I still think that this movie is very realistic, well acted, well written. The only problem I have with it is really the first half, where they have a lot more different characters in the movie, and I thought these conversations were very stiff and not very realistically acted and written. Everything that was just between the two main characters we were following for all of these three movies was perfect. One of the movies directed by Derek Cianfrance is The Light Between the Oceans. This feels very long and very draining, but to be honest, this story is so powerful, so investing, so beautiful. There's so many great things about this story. And the two main characters, that even though I couldn't always get invested into this movie, I still think that the story in itself is very well constructed and very well written. Portrait of a Lady on Fire was definitely a movie I enjoyed. To be honest, this is just the kind of movie that if you don't get invested in the romance as much, the movie just doesn't hit as well. But if you are invested, the movie will probably be perfect. But I couldn't get invested in it a lot, so that's that. I really, really enjoyed The Worst Person of the World. A beautiful movie that I thought was very well acted. and evokes a special feeling. About Time, a movie about a man trying to find the right person or make a person fall in love with him with time travel. And it's a movie with a message of, hey, you have to live your life to the fullest and enjoy every single moment you have. And it was beautiful. It's not always a happy movie, but it feels like a very optimistic movie. Yeah. The Shape of Water, Guillermo del Toro's romance between a fish and a woman. I don't know how, but I was so invested in this romance. It was beautiful. It was really beautiful, and especially because the main character, it's kind of like Alita or Kiki in that it's just such a happy and friendly person that you want to see her succeed and you want to see her find someone as a partner, even if it's a fish. I mean, I'm completely honest. I think if you can make me invested in a romance between a woman and a fish, you have succeeded. And on to the final romance movie on this list, Buffalo 66. A very odd movie. It feels like a guy making a romance who really doesn't know anything about romance, but for some reason still understands it very well. Like the first half of this movie felt like just a very odd comedy, and the last half of this movie felt like an actual romance that I was really invested in. Moving on. Now this is basically the most unorganized section of this whole video series, because this is where I'm going to talk about all the dramas. And I mean, dramas are obviously basically everything. Half of the movies I already talked about on this list are dramas in a way. Starting off with dramas about families. First of all, Fatherhood is a Netflix movie with Kevin Hart, whose wife died and now he has to take care of that child by himself. And it's a very heartwarming movie about him trying to cope with the situation and trying to cope with the fact that at some point he's going to find someone he loves again, and how he deals with that. The Unforgivable, another Netflix movie with Sandra Bullock as the main character, playing a woman who has done a lot of bad things in her life and she kind of regrets it and tries to better herself. And I thought this was a very interesting and investing story. Especially because Sandra Bullock is a very good actress in this film. Okay, I really don't know how to pronounce his name. Meyerowitz, whatever. The Meyerowitz stories, new and selected. A Noah Baumbach movie that is, I guess, very heartwarming, but it felt very disconnected. I didn't always care about what was happening. Leave No Trace, a movie about a father and his daughter who don't live in society and are found by the government to try to put them into society again, but they are just trying to live on their own. And it's a very beautiful movie because it has a very beautiful look and appreciation on nature and on people who appreciate it a lot. Don't need to live in a big city with technology. They just need themselves and nature, and it's a very interesting look in people like these, which I really enjoyed. Some dramas about relationships. First of all, If Beale Street Could Talk, which I could not get invested in. I don't know why. It's directed by the same guy who also made Moonlight, which was a very good movie. For some reason, I just could not get into this film a lot. Marriage Story, a movie about a divorcing couple, also directed by Noah Baumbach. A very beautiful movie. If a movie manages to make me so invested in personal drama and makes me get so emotional with it, then I think it succeeds. And this movie definitely does that. Pieces of a Woman, a Netflix movie that has a very realistic look at how a couple deals with a situation after a tragedy happens. This was very difficult to watch, definitely. Some amazing performances. Place Beyond the Pines, another movie directed by Derek Cianfrance. It's undescribable how great this movie is. It's kind of similar to Waste in that it has a story of people have done a lot of bad things and how that affects their later generations. It was very surprising because I really thought the movie was about the main character, Ryan Gosling and Bradley Cooper, but there's a whole different section of this movie that is something completely different and that I did not expect and that I thought was so incredibly beautiful. One of the best character dramas I've ever seen. Some movies about friends. The Climb is about two friends and basically how their lives are progressing. They have a very toxic relationship, but they always stay friends. And it's a very beautiful look at friendship. Also a very uniquely made movie because I think there's maybe like 10 or 15 scenes in this whole film because the movie is 90 minutes long. All of these scenes are filmed in very long takes and it's kind of acted like a stage play, obviously more cinematic, and I really enjoyed this one. The Five Bloods, a Spike Lee movie that came out on Netflix that was very overlooked in my opinion. It's about 4 or 5 friends who were all together in the Vietnam War and they go back to find the dead body of one of their friends and also a treasure that they hid there, and it's about their casualties and dealing with the past, which is portrayed in a very realistic and tragic way, which I really enjoyed. And The Last Black Man in San Francisco, I really don't know. This is such a unique movie. It has such a different comedic tone in a way, but also not comedic. Like, this movie has such a quick switch between comedic and dramatic scenes. Some of the most beautiful cinematography I've ever seen. Some of the most unique character drama I've ever seen. And also a title track. It's one of the most beautiful songs that I've been introduced to while watching a movie since I've been watching movies. It's called San Francisco Be sure to wear flowers in your hair. Such a beautiful movie. I don't know how to describe it. Some foreign dramas. First of all, Untouchables, a perfect movie. Such a comfort film, really. Like one of the best comfort movies ever. It's just so amazing to watch this friendship between these two people grow over the course of the movie. Yeah, it just gives me shivers every time I just think about this movie. The Piano Teacher, a movie directed by Michael Haneke, and this guy is known for making very depressing and disturbing films. And there's a very difficult scene in this movie. You can have different opinions on it, definitely. Yeah, it's about a woman who really has no happiness in her life, and at some point she gets very sexually attracted to one of her students, which develops a very difficult relationship between these two people. It's a very interesting look at a very abusive relationship between two people. Parasite, there's probably gonna be nothing I can say about this movie that nobody has already said before. I watched it 4 times when it came out in 2019, and I have not watched it since. I am probably oversaturated with this movie and videos about this film. I still have it on DVD, but at some point I'm going to rewatch it because I did think this movie was perfect when I watched it the 4 times. Yeah, I really have no problem with it. It's amazing. Burning feels like a very sad and realistic look at two young people who don't really have any goal in life. They are just kind of lost. But this movie slowly reveals something very sinister that is going on. Like there's not much happens. It's a very slow movie, and one of those movies that I don't know why I'm so fascinated with it. Like it doesn't do anything incredibly new. It doesn't do anything that I have not seen before, but for some reason I'm so fascinated with this movie, and I love just thinking about it. I have it on my wall. You can't see it, but it's definitely on my wall. I'm just so fascinated with this movie. Shoplifters, I don't know why I didn't include this in any of the sections that came before, because this is a movie about family and about crime and about con artists. But I guess, yeah, Shoplifters is about a family of con artists who take a child, or who adopt a child in a way that they find on the street, and they are raising this kid as their own, basically. And this has such an interesting tonal shift in the last act, which I did not expect. Like I thought this was just gonna be a very happy family drama about a kid learning what family really is, but there's a lot more going on with all of the different characters in this film that I think is very interesting to look at. And now we are actually in the last 100 movies, which is amazing to think of. I have talked so much in these videos, holy fuck. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is a great martial arts film. What I didn't realize is that this movie is much more about one of the side characters in this film. There's a girl who doesn't really know where to go in life, and the movie is kind of about two main characters who help her with that in a way. It was a very difficult movie to understand, to me at least. The only movie from Turkey that I have seen is Paper Lives. I thought it was a very great story. This movie is not well rated, even though I really liked it. But the only good reviews that I have seen were in English, and every single review that I have seen on Letterboxd that was in Turkish was negative. So there must be something wrong with this movie that people who are not in the Turkish culture are not seeing. I'm No Longer Here, basically a coming of age movie about a person who is immigrating to America. What I loved about this movie is that it's not just a movie about this main character, but it's also a movie about this culture that she grew up in, which was very interesting to see because I had never heard anything of it. Roma is not a movie I could connect with very much because I just didn't have someone to really relate with. The realism of this movie is just uncomparable. There's so much detail in the environment of this main character that I really appreciated a lot. I liked how this movie feels very grand, even though it's about a very small scale story. Some sports dramas, first of all, The Karate Kid. The Karate Kid was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the chemistry between the two main characters. It felt very slow, like the editing just felt very empty. There was something about it that didn't feel right, but I thought it was a very enjoyable movie. The same thing also applies to The Karate Kid Part 2. This was when the series kind of felt like it was getting a lot more pointless, and I have not seen Karate Kid 3 or 4, but it doesn't feel like movie series is getting any better. And Karate Kid from 2010 was actually one of my favorite movies as a child, with Jaden Smith and Jackie Chan. What I hate most about this movie is that it's called The Karate Kid, even though it's about Jackie Chan teaching with Jaden Smith Kung Fu, which is just a marketing move that I just hate. This is so stupid. Why call it Karate Kid? One of my favorite Clint Eastwood movies is $1 Million Baby. This was an amazing film. I don't really know what the point of this was because it feels like just a very dramatic, sad film. But I would be lying if I said that I did not enjoy this movie for every single second. The Wrestler, a Darren Aronofsky movie, and another case of Darren Aronofsky not being able to make a single happy movie in his career. This is about a depressive wrestler who tries to connect with his daughter again, but he's a big fuck up, so it doesn't really work. Very tragic, great acting. Yeah, one of Darren Aronofsky's more overlooked movies in my opinion. Hustle is a Netflix movie with Adam Sandler that is actually not bad. This is just a very fun sports drama about Adam Sandler's character finding a person that is very promising in basketball. Really, the love that Adam Sandler has for this sport shines through in this movie, which is why this movie is very enjoyable. This is such a long video already, but continuing on, let's get into some dramas about music. First of all, 8 Mile. I went into this movie thinking it was a movie about Eminem, but it's a movie that is more inspired by his story than it is actually about him. But I was surprised by how much this movie actually stands on its own as a good drama without the context that Eminem is involved with it, because this is genuinely a great drama about one person who's trying to overcome all the problems in his life. The movie has a very realistic look on life, but still can be very hopeful at the same time. Another perfect drama about music is Whiplash. I mean, it's not a drama about music, it's a drama about a person who is completely obsessed with trying to be the greatest ever. This is an obsessive artist story of really just a person who basically forgets everything in life or ignores everything in his life to become one of the greatest drummers ever, and it's fascinating to see. Moving on, A Star Is Born is a very great drama about addiction and how love can help people with problems like addiction, and I thought the movie was very heartwarming. I have never seen performances from Bradley Cooper or Lady Gaga that were as great as in this movie. School of Rock is the exact opposite, because it's a very happy movie, like one of the most inspirational, entertaining movies as I've seen about music. And even though a movie like Whiplash is maybe an insight into a person who's obsessed with being the greatest musician, this is an insight into what it's like to be a musician who just loves his craft, because this is another movie written and directed by Damien Chazelle is La La Land. This guy can just make so great movies. He's easily one of my favorite directors. And what I like about this so much is that even though it's this very cheesy and very happy musical about two people falling in love, it's so realistic, and it always still feels like these are two real people that we are following. The ending is one of the best endings that isn't really a good ending. It's not really a happy ending. It's perfectly written. I find it incredibly impressive that Steven Spielberg still hasn't done every genre, because he's been working over 5 decades, and even in 2021 he has done something completely new, and that is making a musical with the remake of West Side Story. And this is great. This is amazing. I think this is an incredibly well-made movie. I mean, of course, there has to be bad musicals as well. First of all, Sneakerella. This is a remake of Cinderella, but with sneakers. And the first song was about the main character singing about how great his kicks are. And I could not stand how embarrassing this movie is. I mean, it's kind of fine because it's the story of Cinderella, and the story of Cinderella is pretty good, but I hated this movie a lot. Music is a movie that is genuinely very much hated, especially because of its controversy. I don't have a huge opinion on the controversy, but I think this movie is still not very enjoyable. And the next movie is a transition into movies that are based on plays, and that movie is Cats. Tom Hooper made his worst movie with Cats. I'm not very excited with The Danish Girl, I'm not very excited about The King's Speech, but wow, this is just so embarrassing. Chicago is another musical. This won Best Picture in 2002, I think, and it's very entertaining. It has a lot of very great catchy songs. The Father is a very heartbreaking movie. I didn't appreciate enough how much work went into this movie, because this has some of the best editing and set design I've ever seen, because there's always something a little bit off. There's so much that this movie does right into getting you to understand and to feel compassion for the people dealing with this disease, and it's very good. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom is a very fun and engaging movie. I thought the movie was very overdramatic in some weird moments, like some of the moments that Chadwick Boseman has in his movie, even though he is a very good actor in this film, just felt kind of unnecessary and too much. All in all, I thought this was very entertaining. The same thing also applies to One Night in Miami. I couldn't really get engaged into this movie a lot because it felt very forced in a way, but it was very well paced, well edited, and so it at least never got boring, but it was just sometimes a little bit too much. And again, the same thing also applies to Malcolm and Marie. Both John David Washington and Zendaya are so amazing in this film. The problem is just, again, that a lot of conflict in this movie that feels like it wouldn't have happened if these two people were just talking. Like, this is supposed to be a very natural, normal conversation between them, but yeah, all of the very dramatic outbursts in this film just felt very forced in a way. Another one of these dramas that only take place in one location is Who Would You Take to a Deserted Island? It was very cheesy, but to be honest, it was very entertaining. Another movie directed by Antoine Fuqua is The Guilty. This movie doesn't work as well as it could have because, first of all, the movie concentrates a lot on the performance and the face of Jake Gyllenhaal, and because he doesn't have a lot to work with in this film, his performance feels very forced in a way, and also it just doesn't seem realistic the way he acts in this film. Now into some dramas about addiction. First of all, Another Round. This is a movie directed by Thomas Winterberg. I've seen it 3 or 4 times at this point, and it's just so entertaining. I think even though a lot of things in this movie are very sad and shouldn't feel very comedic, I think there's still a lot of comedic things about this film that make it still feel very entertaining. Like, it shows both the good and the bad sides of alcohol and never really says if it's actually like good or bad, but it just shows the effects that it has on people. Flight, a movie directed by Robert Zemeckis, and I thought this movie was great. It had some tonal issues, like this just doesn't have the right balance between comedy and drama, but I thought the main performance by Denzel Washington was incredible, and I thought he was a very interesting character to follow. Requiem for a Dream is another case of Darren Aronofsky not being able to make a happy movie, because this is easily one of the most depressing movies I think I've ever seen, and I actually mean it. Like, I didn't even feel sad when I watched the film. I just felt like I was drained out of all emotions. It was so incredibly exhausting to watch this film. Just thinking about this movie or hearing some part of the soundtrack in this film makes me so sad. Sound of Metal is an incredible film directed by Darius Marder, which deals with a heroin addict who loses his hearing. This manages to capture some of the most real performances I've ever seen in a movie. This has some of the best sound design I've ever seen in a movie. This has some of the best performances I've ever seen, especially by Riz Ahmed, who I really, really want to see in more movies. I think he's incredible. Shame is a movie about a sex addict, and this is a very difficult movie to watch, and you kind of never really know what's going on inside the head of the main character, because things just happen and he just does stuff and you are watching. Even if it doesn't really make sense, it's still very fascinating to see. And again, some great performances, especially by Michael Fassbender. Now for all the other dramas on this list. First of all, Skin. Skin is a movie about a skinhead who doesn't want to be a skinhead anymore. I don't like that this movie skipped a lot of the actual transition. Those should have been some of the most important scenes, but it kind of skipped that and only showed the before and the afterwards, and it didn't work as well as it could have. The most interesting part of the movie is basically left out, but the parts that we do see are still very interesting to see. The Secret Life of Walter Mitty is actually such a heartwarming and nice movie to watch. I didn't fully care at the beginning, but this movie just slowly won me over and got me really interested in what was happening next. A movie I only watched because it seemed so boring is a movie called Puzzle, and this is a movie about a woman who manages to grow as a person because she starts puzzling. I mean, this actually worked. I thought it was a very nice and wholesome movie, even though it was sometimes very boring because it's still a movie about a person puzzling. American Beauty, I watched this once and was so blown away by it. Every single scene in this movie was so interesting and so investing to watch. I just loved the transition of the main character, and in some way the finale of this movie is one of the most exciting and tension-filled finales I've ever seen, even though I basically know what's happening. Nobody Knows I'm Here is the perfect title for a movie that really nobody knows, but it's a Spanish drama about a guy who lives in a very reclusive home, but he kind of has a dream of becoming a singer, and this movie is a very beautiful look into the life of this person and how he develops as a person, especially regarding some of the things that happened in his past. I don't know what really to say about The Truman Show, but I thought this movie was a very fun movie. Good Will Hunting is very inspiring. This movie especially feels like it's not doing a lot. Like, the story of this movie feels very insignificant, but all of the characters, you really get to care about them a lot over the course of the movie. Hector and the Search of Happiness is a movie we watched for school, and this is not a bad movie, but it's really not that memorable, sadly. I can't really love One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Basically, this movie is very enjoyable for the most part, but I just can't get over the fact that this main character is the person that he is. I don't know how this is not a problem for most people, but I just can't get over the fact that this guy is established in the first scene that he's as a rapist, basically. So the whole movie I'm just thinking, like, is there some kind of moral about this? I guess a similar movie to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is got interrupted. And even though I don't think this is what most people take from this movie, what I really like about this film is how the whole cast feels like a big family, and it's for the most part a very comfortable movie. But I have to be honest, I don't remember a lot from it. I wasn't as personally affected in this film. The same thing also with Forrest Gump, but I think this story in general is just so unique. Just one guy by accident being present in so many different historical events. It's a very heartwarming story. There was definitely a lot of scenes where I had a big smile on my face because it was just so beautiful to watch. But it definitely isn't one of my favorites. The Shawshank Redemption is so many different movies in once, but actually in a good way. It's been probably 3 years, but I remember this movie as a very hopeful and happy movie, considering the fact that it takes place in a prison. There are a lot of great scenes in this film, but I think the one scene that I always remember when thinking about this movie is the scene where this one prison inmate gets released and has to deal with the fact that now he's forced to live a new life, even though he's been living in a prison for his whole life. I thought it was a great scene. Another movie taking place in a prison is The Green Mile, and I thought this was also just so beautiful. A movie that can just make a very simple story, but make it 3 hours long is, I think, very impressive. This has such a beautiful story, but so much tragedy to it too. Because I didn't want to read the book for school, I watched the 1948 Hamlet movie, which won Best Picture, and it was actually very entertaining, much more humor in it than I expected. And the finale of this movie is actually very, very tense, and I got so invested in it. The 2013 version of The Great Gatsby, directed by Baz Luhrmann, only works half of the time. Sometimes the style worked very well and fit into this setting very well, but sometimes it just didn't fit at all. I was always invested in the story, but when people living in 1930 are listening to Jay-Z, I just think, okay, something is wrong here. The Peanut Butter Falcon, a very simple movie that is very optimistic, very happy, basically a comfort movie with Shia LaBeouf, again, one of my favorite actors. I think this is a perfect summer movie. Castaway was actually a great movie for the most part. The only problem I had with it was that very important sequences in this film are completely left out. There's one time jump in this movie that is very important and is actually like needed, but then there's a time jump where it's actually really necessary to see what happens there, and it just felt like something was missing with this movie because that was left out. There Will Be Blood, I never know what to say about this movie. I think about what I would say about certain movies in my head sometimes, and with this I just can't get any words out. I think it's good. It's very fascinating to watch these characters, but beyond that I never got anything else from this movie. A very underrated and overlooked Netflix movie is The Devil All the Time. This has a lot of different stories intersecting with each other, and all of them have something to do with religion, and I thought it was a very fascinating movie to see because there's something happening with the story that you kind of notice only very late in the movie. Life of Pi, I couldn't get into this movie. I just thought the effects of basically everything happening when it's daytime and basically everything with the animals, it just didn't look realistic enough to me so that I could get really interested in this film. I thought the editing was very odd sometimes, and the cinematography as well. Like, this movie was just technically very odd. Birdman is a movie directed by Alejandro González Iñárritu, and it's probably my least favorite of him, but it's definitely not a bad movie. I'm very angry at Collateral Beauty because half of this movie is so beautiful and has such a tragic and realistic and well-written story, but half of this movie is just so bad and doesn't fit at all in this very emotional story concerning Will Smith. The first Martin McDonagh movie I've seen is 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. This is just a perfect example of why I love Martin McDonagh so much, because he manages to make a very simple story but still make it so fresh. Like, I don't know what this movie does that is so different from every other movie that I've seen that has maybe similar subject matter, but he just has a way of writing all of his characters in a way that makes the story so completely unpredictable, and it introduced me to his filmography, which I am very glad because he made some of my favorite movies this far. Passing was an interesting movie. I thought this movie was mostly interesting when it got to the end because the ending is making me think a lot more about what happened before in the film. The Lost Daughter, even though it's just 2 hours long, really takes its time. It manages to make you feel a lot by just letting you be in the moment that these characters are in, and it feels like one of the most realistic movies I think I've seen. Pig is such a unique film. There's so much character drama that happens in this film, but it takes place in such a unique setting that the main character has a past in. There's so many scenes that are so unbelievably good. I don't think anyone would get what the exact tone of this movie is unless they actually see it. The Last Duel is, I think, the last movie by Ridley Scott that I have on this list. It's a very impressive drama that I thought was just so incredibly interesting to watch because of all of these different sides on the same story. It definitely was very fascinating to see this story kind of unfold and always see new perspectives on the same situation. Encounter was a movie that reveals itself to be something completely different from what you would expect in the beginning. I'm not gonna say what I expected, and I'm also not gonna say what this movie involves into, but this has such a great plot twist. The most conventional movie, probably by Bong Joon-ho, is Okja. Like in other Bong Joon-ho movies, it made me feel a lot of different things. It made me feel very happy, also very sad in some moments. This has a great tone and it's definitely worth a watch. You will never really hear. One of the heaviest movies I think I've ever seen. So many different scenes in this movie had a big effect on my mood while watching this film. This is a very sad and melancholic film about Joaquin Phoenix playing a very, very traumatized man. We are heading to the finish line. All these last movies are just movies that I can't fit into a specific category. My Best Friend's Birthday, I think this is actually a short film in a way. It was supposed to be Quentin Tarantino's first feature movie, but I think half of this movie just got lost in the fire, so this is everything that's left. It's not a good movie because of obvious reasons, but I think it's pretty interesting that you can already tell Tarantino's very distinct style in this very bad black and white short film. The Da Vinci Code is not really a crime movie or a drama, it's just kind of a mystery, and I didn't have a mystery genre in this. I thought this movie had a very interesting mystery, and even though it explains a lot and has a lot of exposition, I still think I was always invested in it, and it didn't help like that this was so much exposition because I still didn't get everything. So I might need to rewatch this, but I don't think I'm interested enough to do it. The Man Who Sleeps is a French experimental movie about a depressed man who has nothing really in life that he likes and that he enjoys. But I don't think there's any sound in this movie except for a narration where a woman is, I don't know if it's a poem, but she's definitely saying something that is kind of describing the situation of this man. And for 70 minutes she does that, and it just gets louder and louder and louder, and it's much more stressful over the course of the movie. I definitely think it's an interesting movie. I can't say I enjoyed it a lot, but it's something I have not seen. I don't know. Fight Club, I really don't know what to say about Fight Club. It's very unique, unpredictable, great progression of a movie. It has such a distinct style. Great comedy, great writing, great acting. It's good. It's probably my favorite David Fincher movie. Shadow has some of the most impressive action I've ever seen. And even though it's very fantastical in a way, it looks so realistic and so violent, but in a good way, not in an over-the-top fun way. It's actually very dramatic and realistic, and I really thought this movie was incredibly impressive. Okay, now I'm thinking of anything's really, I don't know what this category is. It's not a horror film, it's not a thriller, it's not I mean, it's kind of a drama, and it's a very impressive movie. I think the only movie I've seen once and then instantly rewatched it the same day. Very exhausting, definitely, very confusing, and somewhat the best editing I've ever seen in a movie. I don't try to pay attention to the editing a lot because if the editing is good, I think it's just very unnoticeable. But this movie has such noticeable acting because it's deliberately trying to create a very confusing and disorienting atmosphere, and it does that very well. And now for one of the biggest movies of the last year that everybody talked about, everybody has watched it, Everything Everywhere All at Once. This is not a perfect movie. Definitely the humor didn't always work for me. I didn't always get invested in the story. I thought there was a lot of exposition in the beginning that, even though it was necessary, didn't really fit. But to be honest, despite all that, this is one of the most impressive movies ever because there are so many bold ideas that I would never see in a movie ever because nobody would try to actually put them into a movie. So much idiotic, stupid humor that works so well. I could give this 5 stars just for creativity because it is one of the most inventive, fun experiences of a movie I've ever seen. 30 movies to go, and the reason I'm saying this is because this is the very last category that I have for these videos. This is my section where I'm talking about all the German movies I have on this list, giving some recommendations and not recommendations because German movies are half of the time very, very, very bad. That's why I'm starting with The Perfect Secret, in German, Das perfekte Geheimnis. Very stereotypical comedy. If you ask anyone in Germany what they think about German movies, this is the type of movie that they think of. It's cliched, it's not very funny, it's not my target audience probably, but it's also just not very good. Liebesdings is a rom-com that is unfunny. There's a extended sequence in this film where there's a lot of stand-up comedians, and they are all so unfunny. They have absolutely no talent in stand-up comedy, and the jokes just don't land in this film. But this is it's such an odd film because it's so over the top bad sometimes that I just thought this movie was actually on purpose bad. Bruder vor Luder, Bros Before Hoes. This is a movie made by two German YouTubers. It's basically the airplane mode of Germany. Very embarrassing and unfunny. After Potato Salad, Don't Ask, was considered as one of the worst movies ever, especially in Germany. They made a sequel to it, and that's the movie I watched in this list, which is Potato Salad 3, the musical. And it's actually not completely bad. Good scenes in it and some catchy music. It's still very low budget and boring at some points, but it's definitely more enjoyable than most German movies that are made by YouTubers. 2025, The World Enslaved by a Virus is a dystopian movie about what would happen in 2025 if the world was enslaved by COVID. A movie made by people who are complaining about wearing masks is effectively one of the most obnoxious films I think I've ever seen. The Kangaroo Chronicles, this is one of the most annoying things I've ever seen. I just repeated the same thing that I said with 2025. But yeah, this definitely is one of the most annoying things I've ever seen because this movie is just completely mindless, stupid humor that I did not care about, and the main problem with this movie is the fucking kangaroo in this film. I want to say he's the comic relief of this film, but he's neither relieving nor is he comical because he's just unfunny and annoying, and I hate every single scene that this guy is in, and he's the main character, so he's in basically every scene. Moving on, an animated comedy is Lizzie and the Wild Emperor. This is a fun movie, definitely. The humor doesn't work as well now compared to when I watched it as a child and thought it was one of the most hilarious things I've ever seen. But I can understand why I liked it as a kid, definitely. Money to Shoe, a classic German comedy that is just hilarious. There's so many great jokes in this, and I enjoyed it a lot. Then two of my childhood favorite movies. First of all, Seven Dwarfs. This is a hilarious film. I loved this as a child, and because I've grown on this movie so much over the course of my whole life, I still think every single joke that I liked as a kid in this film is still funny to this day. It's a part of my personality. And the second movie as well, Seven Dwarfs, The Forest is Not Enough. This is not as funny as the first one, but it's just a part of my childhood. I could watch this any day and I would have fun with it. Look Who's Back, a movie about Adolf Hitler coming back into present day. It was a fun movie. I don't know what to say, really. I'm getting really fucking exhausted at this point. I've talked about 300 fucking movies. All Quiet on the Western Front is the American movie adaptation of the German novel from 1930. This won Best Picture. This is definitely a very impressive movie for the time that this came out in, because it's technically so well made, and this is just such a great adaptation of the novel, and definitely one of the best anti-war movies because it really just shows the pointlessness of war in a very good way, just like movies like Come and See. Then there's also the 2022 remake, All Quiet on the Western Front, that actually won Best International Feature last year at the Oscars. This is a very interesting movie because I didn't think they would do a lot more different to the story, but they still changed a lot up and made this movie very fresh again. The only thing I don't like about this movie as much as the first one is that the very last scene feels a little more hopeful, but I guess that's also not a very bad thing. Some movies about World War II. First of all, When Hitler Stole the Pink Rabbit. This could be a very interesting story about how children are affected during World War II, but to be honest, this movie was just boring. There was not really enough content to make this an exciting film. A way better movie, in my opinion, showing how children are affected by World War II is Napola, Elite für den Führer, or in English, Before the Fall. This is about a group of boys who are accepted in the National Political Academy, and it shows their lives and how their lives basically get destroyed by the influence of the Second World War. And it's very tragic. There's a lot of great things about this film. The Collini Case, or Der Fall Collini, is a movie that shows how everything that has happened in the Second World War still has an influence on the people that are living nowadays. It's about a murder case that has something to do with the genocide that has happened in the Second World War in Germany. And it's a very fascinating movie to see, very interesting. Also movies about the life in the German Democratic Republic. First of all, The Lives of Others, one of the most well appreciated German movies I think ever. It's directed by Florian Henkel von Donnersmarck. Came out in 2006 and has won the Best International Feature Oscar, which I love, because this is very great drama. One of those movies that has a very simple story in the beginning, but it just escalates more and more and more over the course of the movie, making it a very well constructed tragedy. Balloon is about a family that wants to escape the German Democratic Republic with a balloon, and it's one of the most stressful movies I've ever seen because it's constant paranoia for 2 hours. The Silent Revolution, a very great look into how children are affected during this time, because it shows the influence that the government has on people when they feel like you are a traitor to the state. And so this basically is about a whole class of students who are feeling the impact because of decisions that they made. It's a very interesting film that I thought was also very tense for the most part. And a movie that's not particularly about the German Democratic Republic, but it takes place during that time, and that is The Golden Glove. This is one of the most disturbing, stressful, and violent horror movies I've ever seen, depicting a real life serial killer that has lived in Hamburg. Don't know what to get from this movie, but it's definitely a very interesting look into some different types of movies I haven't seen from Germany this far. And all the other movies I have on this list, we are getting into the last 10 movies. First of all, Ich sehe, or in English, Goodnight Mommy. This manages to feel very creepy because I don't think there's any music in this film. It's about two brothers who are getting suspicious that their mother is not their mother anymore, or at least it's a person posing as their mother, and so they come up with more and more sinister things to do to their mother to find out if she's actually real. And this movie gets slowly but surely more revealing of its story, and I think it's a very fascinating film. One of the oldest movies I have on this list is M. This is a movie directed by Fritz Lang. It's about a murderer that is hunted by a whole city, and this is a very disturbing film. I think I would appreciate this a lot more when I rewatch it. But in general, it's a very interesting story to see, and it has a great finale. I was very disturbed by it, but also very invested in. My fucking voice is hurting at this point. Next movie is part of a trilogy. This is the Ruby Red trilogy, a sci-fi coming-of-age time travel trilogy of movies that is probably so great as a kid, but watching this now, it feels so amateur in a way. Sometimes the acting is so horrible, but it's still, there's a lot of fun in this film. Both the first one, the second one, Sapphire Blue, and Emerald Green, but this just kind of blended into one big chunk of movies that I just didn't really care for. The Verdict, a courtroom drama about the prosecution of a man who's killed a lot of people while trying to save a lot more people, and it's about this ethical conflict of, is it the right thing to do if you can save a lot of people and have to sacrifice fewer people than that. The Physician is a German produced but English language movie about, I actually don't know what this movie is about anymore, and I really don't care. I just want to get finished with this. It's a good movie. I definitely was interested in this, but I couldn't tell you a single thing that happened in this film. Last 5 movies. First of all, Jungle Child. This is about a girl who grows up in Papua New Guinea with a tribe and learns their ways of living, and it's a very fascinating look at how this influenced her character in a big way. The Wave is one of those German classics, in my opinion. It's a very important movie to watch, and even though it didn't seem like a very realistic portrayal of how this story would unfold, it's actually, I think, based on a real story. It's kind of a must-watch for German movies, in my opinion. Berlin Alexanderplatz. This is a movie from 2019. It's an adaptation of the book, I think. Another adaptation after in the 70s. I think there was also a TV series adaptation of this. And this is a very difficult movie to sit through. This to me is the type of movie that does it right, because it's a remake of something that puts the story of the source material into a new and more modern context. Instead of being about a person who comes out of jail, it's about an immigrant that comes from overseas to Germany and tries to live in Germany, but slowly sinks into the criminal underworld of Berlin. And I thought this was an amazing, fascinating look into this character, and definitely one of the best performances I've ever seen in a movie by an actor. This actor is called Albrecht Schuch, and he plays the main antagonist in this film. And this movie introduced me to this guy, and he's one of my favorite actors I've ever seen. He has done a few movies, I've seen most of them, and he's incredibly impressive. Victoria is a 2015 movie about a woman who meets a few guys in the club and slowly gets dragged into a very disturbing plot of a movie that unfolds over the course of the night. A movie completely filmed in one shot, and I don't mean that this movie has just one shot over the course of the movie, not like 1917 or Birdman where they are stitched together. No, this actually was filmed over the course of one night in one continuous shot. I think the movie is over 2 hours long, and that just it's so impressive. Not just that they filmed this in one shot, but they are in so many different locations too. Like they are not just in one building or anything. They actually move through Berlin or whatever city this movie takes place in, and they actually move into so many different locations, and it's so impressive to see. There's a lot of talent behind the camera with this one, but also in front of the camera, the acting is great. I think the story is amazing, and it's easily one of the most stressful movies I've ever seen. And finally, the last movie I've also seen on this list, and the number 1000 on this fucking list is Fabian oder Der Gang für die Hunde, or in English, Fabian Going to the Dogs. I wish I could say anything more about this because I didn't get this movie a lot. It's a movie based on German literature, so I obviously don't have a context from that. It's a very experimental film, 3 hours long, has 3 different parts that all feel completely different from each other, but this time again in a good way. I really don't know what to fucking say. Albrecht Stuch is in this movie again, and he is definitely great in this movie. Basically every actor in this film does a great job. This has a lot of very weirdly edited scenes that feel very experimental but still work so well. I have never seen anything like it. I really think that is one of the most overlooked German movies, even for Germans. Like I don't know anybody who knows this movie except for the person that recommended it to and the person I watched this with. So yeah. Outro, I guess. I hope you can forgive me for being so exhausted in the end. I just really wanted to get finished with recording all of these videos, so I made basically all 300 of this video in one day, which is a lot. We are finished. This is the end, at least, of me reviewing all of these. The next video will be all about me talking about the worst movies again, so easily the most painful video. But because it's just 50, it might be a lot quicker than all of the videos I've just made. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for getting this far. I don't know if you watched all of this or if you just skipped to the end, but thank you for making it. And I guess we'll see us in the next video.